Good morning, everyone. Welcome for another episode of BNN with Bhante Sudaso. This morning, we will be studying the first part of the Mahāpuṇṇama Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 109, and you can find the link in the live chat. And welcome to Gita, Gabriella, Liz, who says, "Oh, I love the full night Sutta." Welcome to Bradley, Jens, Mark, Edward, Sally, Kevin, Diane, and Ella. And Diane says, "Good morning from rain-soaked Ohio." And good morning from sunny New Jersey. Have a beautiful sunny day. And good morning to Bhante Sudaso. Oh, and lots of other new friends coming in. Hello, Galaxy, who's watching from Malaysia, and Stacy, and Yenny, and Kyle. All right, so without further ado, I will pass it on to Bhante.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So today we'll be going through the first half of Majjhima Nikaya 109, the Mahāpuṇṇama Sutta. And as usual, I'll read through the sutta and I'll periodically make some explanations. And when we're about halfway through the sutta, then we'll stop and have some Q&A. So the sutta begins. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Savatthi in the eastern park at the palace of Megara's mother. Now on this occasion, it was the Uposatha day, the 15th day of the fortnight, when the moon was full. The Blessed One was seated in the open air, surrounded by the community of monks. Then a certain monk rose from his seat, arranged his robe on one shoulder, extended his hands towards the Blessed One with the palms pressed together, and said to him, "Bhante, I might ask about a particular point, if the Blessed One makes this an opportunity for the answer to a question." And the Buddha replies, "Therefore, monk, sit on your own seat and ask what you wish." So this is the scene. It's a full moon night, and the Buddha is sitting in the forest surrounded by a group of monks. And one of them stands up and asks permission to ask a question about Dhamma. And the Buddha says to sit on your own seat and ask your question. Then that monk sat on his own seat and said to the Blessed One, "Bhante, are these the 5 aggregates affected by clinging? The body aggregate affected by clinging, the feeling aggregate affected by clinging, the recognition aggregate affected by clinging, the thought aggregate affected by clinging, and the consciousness aggregate affected by clinging?" So this is clearly one of my older translations, because these days I'm not using the word aggregate as a translation of the word khanda. So the word aggregate is quite an uncommon English word, which to be honest, I never used this word once in my entire life prior to getting into Buddhism. And so actually, to me, aggregate is a technical term which only has meaning in a Buddhist context. So although I'm aware that it also has an ordinary English meaning, I never used it in that way. So effectively, this is a meaningless word which just means khanda to me. But I find it to be quite a clunky and awkward word. So usually these days I translate khanda as component. So the 5 khandas are the 5 components of body and mind. So that's how I usually translate this word. The other part of this is affected by clinging. So the Pali term is upadana khanda. So upadana means grasping or clinging. Literally, it means taking close or holding close. So it has both this implication of grabbing, reaching out to grab something to bring it close to you, and also keeping something close to you. So these days I'm usually translating upadana as grasping, sometimes as attaching or attachment, but usually as grasping. So the other issue here is how to relate these two terms together. So upadana kanda literally just means grasping component. So with Pali word compounds, the relationship between the words in a compound is not explicitly stated. It has to be inferred, which is not always easy. Context doesn't always give us sufficient clues in order to infer the relationship between the words in a word compound. So we often wind up with several possible meanings for any given word compound. So the word compound upadana kanda, I'm more inclined to lean towards it meaning subject to grasping or prone to grasping, rather than affected by grasping. So affected by grasping seems to imply that it's already under the influence of grasping. It's already under the sway of grasping, something that's already happened, rather than something which is subject to grasping, which would mean that it's not inherently affected by grasping, but it is something which we tend to grasp at, something which we tend to attach to, something which we tend to have reactive tendencies of desire and aversion around. So these days I would more likely translate this as the 5 components subject to grasping, rather than the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. Then the 5 khandas themselves, the 5 components are rupa, body, vedana, feeling, sanya, recognition, sankhara, thought or mental formations, and vijnana, which is consciousness. So elsewhere I've talked at some length about the 5 khandas and what they are and how to relate to them. Briefly speaking, this is a summary of body and mind. It's a summary of how we experience the world, how we relate to the world. And in particular, it's a summary of what we identify as me. So we think the body is me. We think our feelings are me. We think the tendencies to identify certain sensory experiences as one thing or another. We think that's me. We think that the thoughts and emotions and tendencies in the mind, we think that's me. And we think consciousness is me. So the 5 khandas fundamentally are the 5 components of self-identity, the 5 components of what we think of as me and mine. So the Buddha confirms, carrying on with the sutta, the Buddha confirms the monk's statement. He says, monk, these are the 5 components subject to grasping, body, feeling, recognition, thought, and consciousness. And the monk says, excellent, Bhante. After delighting and rejoicing in the Blessed One's statement, that monk asked him another question. Bhante, what is the root of these 5 aggregates affected by clinging? And the Buddha replies, monk, the root of these 5 components subject to grasping is interest. So the Pali word for interest here is chanda. So just look at the Pali here. Yeah, chanda. So chanda is often translated as desire, but it seems to have a broader meaning, where in some places it's used to mean simply being interested in something. So an inclination towards something, whereas desire in English usually carries a relatively strong connotation. Like, oh, I have a desire for fill in the blank. That implies something relatively strong. Whereas chanda also can just be this more subtle inclination, subtle leaning towards something. So an interest in something. So not necessarily an intense, overwhelming craving. So also the Buddha is pointing here. He's like, well, what is it that is the basis for experiencing the 5 components as being subject to grasping? Well, the basis is interest. It's desire. It's this leaning towards. Leaning towards what? So the Buddha goes into a bit more explanation on this. So I'll read a bit more of the explanation and I'll talk a bit more about it. So the Buddha says, monk, the root of these 5 components subject to grasping is interest. And the monk asks, Bhante, is clinging identical with the 5 aggregates affected by clinging? Or is clinging separate from the 5 aggregates affected by clinging? So this is an interesting question that the monk is asking here. So he's saying, is clinging the same as the 5 khandhas? So in other words, are the 5 khandhas simply a manifestation of grasping, a manifestation of clinging? And the alternative he gives is he says, or is grasping separate from the 5 khandhas? Is it something completely apart? So you've got your 5 khandhas and you've got your grasping, but they're completely apart. What is it here? Are they exactly the same thing, or are they separate from each other? And the Buddha replies, monk, clinging is not identical with the 5 aggregates affected by clinging, nor is clinging separate from the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. So the Buddha says neither one of these statements is correct. So you can't say that clinging and the 5 khandhas are exactly the same thing, but you also can't say that they're separate from each other. There's a close relationship and link between them, but they're not identical with each other. So the Buddha says, monk, the interest and passion in regard to the 5 aggregates affected by clinging is the clinging there. In other words, you have the 5 khandhas, and then there is interest and passion. So the word translated here as passion is raga, which can also be translated as lust. So interest and lust, or interest and passion regarding the 5 khandhas. And that is what creates the experience of having 5 khandhas affected by grasping. So you have the 5 khandhas, which are not inherently clinging. They're not inherently grasping. They are what they are. It's just a piece of samsara. It's just a manifestation of the conditional world. But as we get lost in interest and passion and desire and obsession, then that creates the experience of the 5 khandhas affected by grasping, the 5 khandhas subject to grasping. Then the monk asks, Bhante, can there be different kinds of interest and passion in regard to the 5 aggregates affected by clinging? And the Buddha replies, there can be, monk, the Blessed One said. Monk, here someone thinks, may the body be thus in the future. May feeling be thus in the future. May recognition be thus in the future. May thought be thus in the future. May consciousness be thus in the future. Monk, it is in this way that there can be different kinds of interest and passion in regard to the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. So it's interesting here that when asked about different kinds of desire related to the 5 components, the Buddha emphasizes in each case wanting the 5 khandhas to be something in the future. So wanting some particular future experience of body and mind. So it's noteworthy that he doesn't actually talk at all about wanting to change one's present experience, because technically speaking, you can't change your present experience. You can know your present experience, but you can't change it. What we can do is we can create volition, we can create intention, which will change our future experience. And future can mean the next instant, the next moment. But technically, the present moment is not something we can directly change. We can set in motion a causal chain which can have long-reaching impact, but the present moment just is exactly what it is, and there's no getting around that. So he's pointing here to the way that we form desire about how we want body and mind to be in the future. We want our body to be a particular way. We want our feelings to be a particular way, usually pleasant. We want our recognition process to be a particular way, usually something more interesting than what it is. We want our mental phenomena to be a particular way. We want to have control over our thoughts and moods and emotions. We want our consciousness to be a particular way. So all of this is based upon the belief that body and mind are who we are, and that therefore trying to control and direct it in a particular way is extremely important to us. It's also based upon the belief that if we get certain experiences of body and mind, that will make us happy or will bring us satisfaction. So that's also based upon this fundamental delusion that if we just line the world up in the right way, that everything will be okay, that we'll get everything that we want and life will be wonderful and joyful. If we just get our body just right, or if we just get our feelings just right, then everything will be great. Which historically it's never worked out that way, but nonetheless we keep clinging to this idea, we keep clinging to this belief. So the next section here, the monk asks, Bhante, how far does the term aggregate extend? And the Buddha replies to the monk. He says, monk, any body, past, future, or present, internal or external, subtle or not subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, this is the body aggregate. Any feeling, past, future, or present, internal or external, subtle or not subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, this is the feeling aggregate. And then the same with recognition, thought, and consciousness. So with each one, the Buddha is emphasizing the scope of the term khandha. So including past, present, and future. So every experience of body, past, present, and future, whether internal or external, whether subtle or not subtle. So he's making the point here that it's not that, for example, devas have subtle bodies, but they still have bodies. So they're not distinctly different from our experience of body. It's subtle rather than coarse. Human bodies are coarse, deva bodies are subtle, but it's still the experience of a body. So it still fits in the same broad category and is still subject to the same basic defilements and the same basic delusions. And the same with the other khandhas. The other khandhas also similarly are subject to that same tendency of grasping and attachment and self-identity. And it's been that way in the past, it is that way now, and it will be that way in the future. So this is not something which is subject to change. So, of course, our 5 khandhas are constantly changing, but they all have the same basic characteristics. No matter what kind of body we have, whether it's the body of a human, whether it's the body of a cat, whether it's the body of a deva, whether it's the body of a ghost, whether it's the body of a Brahma, whether it's male or female or transgender, whether it's tall or short or thin or fat, like whatever it is, it's still just a body. So fundamentally, the experience is basically the same, the experience of a physical body. Similarly with feeling. Once again, it doesn't really matter whether we're a human or a cat or a deva or any other kind of being. Fundamentally, we're just feeling pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. That's it. the experience is pretty much the same, regardless of the details and specifics. And the same with the other khandas. So the 5 khandas are a universal experience that all beings in every class of being experiences, with one exception, by the way, which is the highest heaven realms. They don't have physical bodies at all. So they don't have kaya khanda or rupa khanda. They don't have kaya, they don't have rupa, they don't have a physical form at all. But they still have the 4 mental aggregates, the 4 mental khandas. But otherwise, all beings in samsara have 5 khandas. They have exactly the same general experience. So the details are a bit different. Cats have tails and claws, for example, and fur, but otherwise not dramatically different. Their bodies feel like a body, not dramatically different from our bodies. Devas have very light, subtle, malleable bodies, which are very pleasant and easy to control. But nonetheless, they're bodies. Their experience of body is not dramatically different from our experience of body. It's still just body, still just a physical form of some kind. So the Buddha here is emphasizing the universality of the experience of the 5 khandas, that this is something which applies to all sentient beings within samsara. Then the monk asks, Bhante, what is the cause of and reason for awareness of the body aggregate? What is the cause and reason for awareness of the feeling aggregate? What is the cause of and reason for awareness of the recognition aggregate? What is the cause of and reason for awareness of the thought aggregate? What is the cause of and reason for awareness of the consciousness aggregate? So the word translated here as awareness is paññāpana, which literally means to point something out, to make something known. So paññāpana, to make something known, which is it's a little unclear exactly what the monk is meaning by using this verb here. So it's not a terribly common use of this particular verb in Pali. So a literal translation would be, what is the cause of and reason for making known the body khanda, or bringing about awareness of the body khanda, the rupa khanda. So this can be translated as manifestation. What is the cause and reason for manifestation of the body component? But that also feels a little bit off, not quite pinning down the meaning. Pointing out of the body khanda, like the ability to indicate it. What is the cause of and reason for indicating the body khanda? That's also a way of looking at it. Or experiencing, being able to experience the body khanda. So there's a range of meanings here. So here with this translation, whenever I made this translation, which was years ago, it looks like, I chose the word awareness for paññāpana, which is not a terribly literal translation, but it kind of tries to capture this constellation of meanings of this word paññāpana. So basically, why do we have the experience of the 5 khandas? That's what this monk is basically asking. He's like, why do we have the experience of the 5 khandas? And the Buddha says, monk, the 4 great elements are the cause of and reason for awareness of the body component. Sense contact is the cause of and reason for awareness of the feeling component. Sense contact is the cause of and reason for awareness of the recognition component. Mind and body is the cause of and reason for awareness of the consciousness component. And there's a missing phrase here. There should also be sense contact is the cause of and reason for the sankhara khanda, so the mental phenomenon component. So the four great elements, again, these are the four ways that we experience the physical world: solidity, fluidity, heat, and motion is one way it's translated. So earth, water, fire, and air. So this is what allows us to have an awareness of the body khanda, is the experience of solidity, fluidity, heat, and distension or motion. Then sense contact is how we become aware of feeling. When we have a sensory experience, then we become aware of the feeling of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Sense contact is how we become aware of recognition. So when we have a sensory experience, then we notice the tendency to immediately place a label and an identity on whatever we're sensing. So we have a sensory experience, and then we immediately label it carpet, or a sense experience, and we immediately label it music. So that's arising because of sense contact. Depends upon sense contact. When there's sense contact present, then it's possible to recognize the functioning of the recognition component of mind. It's interesting, though, that he also says sense contact is the cause of and reason for awareness of sankhara, mental formations, thoughts and emotions. So sense contact spurs us into thinking about things. Sense contact spurs us into emotional responses to things. So also recognizing the relationship between sensory experiences and thoughts and emotions. So we have some kind of sense contact, and it stirs up thinking in the mind, or it stirs up an emotional reaction in the mind. So also noticing that relationship between sensation and thought. And then finally, he says mind and body, so that's nama rupa. Mind and body is the cause of and reason for awareness of the consciousness component. So it's consciousness of mind and body, consciousness of sensory experience, consciousness of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thought. So at this point, we should probably stop and take some questions, as we're about halfway through the sutta. And at this point, the sutta takes a significant shift in tone. So maybe we can go ahead and take some questions at this time.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So, Marielle says, good evening. So she might have changed the time zone. Hi, Kevin. He says, thanks for the reminder regards to the body. Since the shutdown, I've been suffering over the closure of my gym. Embarrassing to admit, given all the other horrors, but it won't bring lasting happiness. And Bradley says, off topic, but a couple gyms in New Jersey here are reopening against the lockdown order. And Kevin says, ha ha ha, America. And Bradley says, some folks really want their form to be thus. And Kevin said, sadly, I can't relate to that, but I'm working on it. That said, I wouldn't go as far as to go to an illegal gym.
Well, so here at Buddhist Insights, we have our own gym in the backyard. It's a gigantic pile of garden soil that needs to be spread out.
So if you want to come and shape your form.
It's been giving the thighs and calves part of my form quite a bit of Vedana lately.
Yes. Is it the pleasant feeling or the unpleasant feeling or the neutral feeling?
I'm trying to have it be a neutral feeling.
So Bradley says, the practice involves some manipulation of the five khandhas, no? Right?
It depends on what you mean by manipulation. To some degree, we are trying to change especially our sanya and our sankhara. So that's where we tend to get into a lot of trouble, is with sanya and sankhara. So sanya, we misperceive the world, and sankhara, we produce unwholesome responses to the world. So sanya and sankhara, we're definitely working pretty hard to do something about. Rupa, not so much. Rupa, we're more trying to change our attitudes towards the body rather than trying to change the body itself. The one exception, of course, is developing flexibility to sit in full lotus. That's definitely an area where you should be controlling your rupa. Amazing, no eye rolling this time, only a little bit of laughter. Similarly, Vedana, with very advanced practice, you can get to a point where you have some control over Vedana, where you can change unpleasant Vedana into neutral or pleasant Vedana, for example. But usually what we're doing instead is recognizing Vedana, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and cultivating equanimity instead of falling into our old desire, aversion, apathy modes. Instead, we cultivate equanimity. And similarly with consciousness, we're not necessarily trying to control consciousness. Rather, we're trying to understand it and to recognize it as impermanent, unsatisfying, and not self. So I would say in terms of manipulating the khandhas, where that comes in most strongly is in terms of sanya and sankhara. So we're trying to transform our misperceptions of the world into accurate perceptions. So cultivating things like anicca sanya, dukkha sanya, anatta sanya. So actively cultivating accurate and wholesome, wise sanya. And also in sankhara, we're trying to actively cultivate wholesome sankharas, such as love and kindness, and to let go of unwholesome sankharas.
And Gita is asking, Bhante, what was the second and third components? Can you please give a further explanation?
So the second one is Vedana in Pali, which is usually translated as feeling, and it refers particularly to the experience of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So whenever we have any kind of sensory experience, then we almost instantly label it as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So you put a spoonful of ice cream in your mouth, and you almost immediately label it pleasant. You put some cilantro in your mouth, and you almost immediately label it as unpleasant. You put some water in your mouth, and you almost immediately label it as neutral. That's Vedana. Then sanya is the recognition process or identification process. So that's where we have a sensory experience, and then we decide what we think it is. So right now, for example, I am seeing something. What am I actually seeing? Well, I'm just seeing a jumbled mixture of colors, fundamentally. But then I decide that means I'm looking at an iPhone mounted on a tripod. So out of that jumbled array of visual impressions, I project the idea, purple iPhone mounted on black tripod. That's sanya. Does that make a bit more sense? Did I clear that up? Okay, next question.
Oh, and welcome, Brian. Good to see you online. Hope all is well. And Raymond says, morning, Bhante. Thank you for sharing the Dhamma. Isn't karma a good answer of the reason why we experience the khandhas?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, everything is karma. So that ultimately, that's the right answer to why we experience anything. Every experience we have is the result of karma. And elsewhere in the suttas, the Buddha talks about things in terms of karma. But here he's approaching a slightly different way of looking at it. So rather than emphasizing karma, he's emphasizing more the basis from which things can be experienced. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a sensory experience, and then we almost immediately label it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So of course, why are we having a sensory experience in the first place? Well, because of karma. Why do we have a tendency to label some things as pleasant and others unpleasant? Well, that's also the result of past karma. So technically, that's all karma. But the immediate condition, the immediate basis for the arising of Vedana is the sensory contact. So here, as I see it, the Buddha is pointing out the immediate basis. Of course, all of that is conditioned and affected by past karma. Of course. And the whole experience is arising from past karma, of course. But the Buddha is pointing out the immediate basis for the experience. Okay.
And Yanni says, is it okay to have intention as long as not too clingy and have some flexibility? As a lay person, will that be acceptable?
Yeah, just watch your mind. Basically, we can divide intention into three categories: wholesome, unwholesome, and neutral, as with everything else. So wholesome intention is things which are based on wisdom and compassion, things which are bringing benefit to sentient beings, things which optimally lead towards awakening, and at a minimum bring ordinary worldly benefit to people. Those are wholesome intentions. Neutral intentions are things which don't really fundamentally make much difference one way or the other. So this often is related to our jobs, for example. Often our jobs we're just kind of aiming for neutral. They're not particularly wholesome, but they're not particularly unwholesome either. So we're just aiming for neutral. And then unwholesome intention is, for example, the cat yesterday was out in the yard and started torturing a bird and quite badly injured it, and I think it died. So that's a lot of unwholesome intention. So the intention to torture and murder another living being is pretty unwholesome. Intention to cultivate the factors of awakening and move towards enlightenment, that's wonderful and praiseworthy, and absolutely yes, you should do that. And in fact, cling very tightly to that because that's doing you a lot of good. Intention to bring ordinary worldly happiness to yourself and others, that's okay, but be a little more careful there. That you're not just fueling your own desires, that you're not just fueling your craving and attachment, but rather that you're actually doing things which nourish and support living beings. Things which are neutral, again, be careful that we're doing it without any attachment to result. So you want to get something done, you want to accomplish something, you want to get something, you want to achieve something. Well, it's fine to have those intentions, just do so without any attachment to result. So whether you get the result you want or not doesn't matter at all. Then it's okay. You can do what you do, just don't be bothered the slightest bit if it doesn't turn out that way. So just see it as a kind of a meaningless game that you play. Doesn't really matter one way or the other. But we do it anyway because, well, we'll see what happens. Okay.
And Brian has an unrelated question. So if all the unrelated questions can be asked this evening, actually, at 7:30 p.m. for monk chat, which is not currently on the schedule, but it will be in the next hour because we realized we forgot to add the upcoming. But yeah, this evening there will be monk chat, so you can bring it. And we'll answer that. And yes, Sally, you're welcome to ask more than 2 questions during not... We only have the 2-question rule during long chat, but every other time you're welcome to ask as many questions as you like. And Kevin says, Sanya seems intrinsically connected to language. That is, when we were pre-verbal and still are as babies, is that particular kanda not active?
No, I would say it's still active. It's just active on a subverbal level. So this becomes clearer actually as your meditation practice develops and you start to operate in a predominantly non-verbal frame of mind. And you'll notice that sanya is still in full operation. In fact, it becomes easier to recognize the operating of sanya. It's still in full swing. You'll see something and you'll recognize it as bricks and mortar, or statue or painting or whatever it is. But you won't bring up the word in your mind, painting or brick or statue. But nonetheless, you'll know that's what it is. You'll know in a non-verbal way that that's what it is. So a baby still can identify things like food, even though they don't have the word food, for example. Same with animals. Animals can still identify things, even though they don't necessarily have verbal awareness or verbal thinking. They can still identify food and predators and safety and so on. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, and yesterday Stan was a little evil. Now we're searching methods for him not to assassinate birds when he goes out. I found some tricks. And Gita says, so Bhante, we must be mindful of the present moment, of how we react and shape it to be equanimity / neutral state of mind.
Yeah.
That was easy. And Liz says, when one is enlightened, would they know recognition to be others' recognition, or does recognition cease to exist as if everything is nothing?
So in the suttas, it does clearly state that an awakened being still has the 5 khandhas, which includes sanya, it includes the recognition process, but that they clearly understand the 5 khandhas. So they aren't fooled by it. So they can see the tendency to identify the world in particular ways, but they're not fooled by it. They recognize the underlying reality, and they recognize the tendency to project certain ideas on that reality, but they aren't fooled by it.
Bradley says, so the issue isn't feeling / Vedana, for example, but the craving and attachment that arises in relation to it?
Correct.
And Sally says, could Bhante explain on sense contact is the cause of recognition, volitional formations? I thought mind object is different from sensual experience.
Well, fundamentally, it's mind objects. It's all mind objects. Yeah.
Okay, that was the last question, but maybe something else will appear in the meanwhile. And I actually had a question on, hold on. Sally also says, recognition and volitional formation is part of consciousness, isn't it? So the causes are mind. I can accept this.
Yeah, you can look at it that way. Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily say that Sanya, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara are vijnana. I wouldn't necessarily say that. Rather, I would say that one can be conscious of Vedana, Sanya, and Sankara. So in that sense, you can say that they're contained within consciousness. You had a question?
Yes, I wanted some further explanation on among the four great elements are the cause and reason for awareness for the body aggregate.
Mm.
So it goes sense contact. What would that be in Pali?
Phassa.
Phassa is the cause for
Vedana, Sanya,
for
and
Vedana.
Sankara. Yeah.
Then phassa is the cause also for perception.
Mhm.
And then there is the one that is missing, right?
Which is Sankara.
And what is the cause? Is it always phassa?
Phassa. Same phassa.
Phassa is the cause of samsara. Sankara. Freudian lapsus. And Namarupa is the cause of consciousness.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I don't understand why Namarupa is the cause. Like, I don't understand. And how is that in relation to the four elements?
Well, so Namarupa, elsewhere the Buddha defines Namarupa. Rupa is the four elements. And Nama he defines as mental components. So Vedana, Sanya, Manasikara. So mental activities, awareness, attention. It's interesting that he puts it this way. So I'm thinking of dependent origination, where we see a slightly different way of explaining the basis of things, using the same word paccaya. So here, paccaya is translated as reason. So paccaya is commonly translated as dependence.
Mm-hmm.
So avijja paccaya sankara, sankara paccaya vijnana, vijnana paccaya nama rupa, nama rupa paccaya salayatana, salayatana paccaya phasso. So we see this sequence unfolding. From consciousness, there is nama rupa, mind and body. From mind and body, there is the six senses. From the six senses, there is sense contact. From sense contact, there is feeling, and so on. Here, though, he's referring to vijnana khanda, so the component of mind called vijnana, which is usually understood as meaning consciousness of the six senses. So awareness of the six senses depends upon there already being mind and body present. So nama rupa paccaya salayatana. The six senses come from nama rupa, are based upon nama rupa. Mm. The reason for the experience of the six senses is because we have nama rupa. Mm. So here vijnana is being used for consciousness of the six senses. Therefore, its direct basis is nama rupa, mind and body. Whereas in dependent origination, vijnana is referring to something more primal, something more fundamental than consciousness of the six senses. But there's also elsewhere in the suttas where the Buddha points out this little circle where he says Namarupa is the basis for vijnana, and vijnana is the basis for Namarupa. And there's this little loop where and the person asking says like, well, how is this possible? And the Buddha says this is how it is. There's this loop. Namarupa, vijnana, vijnana, namarupa. Namarupa, vijnana, vijnana, namarupa. They're based on each other. They spin around each other. And the simile that's given is like two sticks leaning against each other. Does that answer your question?
I guess I'm still, it's too intellectual for me rather than experiential. So until I actually an experiential understanding, it's
I think it's also important to keep in mind that the khandas are talking about how we experience the world.
Mm-hmm.
So the khandhas don't have absolute existence. They don't have absolute reality. They're just ways that we relate to samsara. They're ways that we experience samsara, but they're not fundamentally real. They're not intrinsically existent. They're just ways that we relate to the world.
Yeah.
It's like a conceptual framework that one uses to try to make sense out of something which otherwise is very hard to make sense of.
I'll contemplate on that. Thank you, Bhante. And Brandy asks, how are we to understand the cessation of the causal chain as described in dependent co-arising? In other words, does the cessation of mind and body mean the cessation of the five khandhas?
So that's getting into a large topic. So did we have a talk on dependent origination recently?
We did not. We should.
Not. We'll put it on the list. So talking about paticca samuppada is not a quick thing. It always requires quite a bit of time. Nonetheless, I could try to give a quick answer to that question.
You could.
Or somebody make a note to have a paticca samuppada talk. Okay. Well, again, an enlightened being still appears to manifest in the world in terms of five khandhas, mind and body.
Sorry, Relly says, it felt complex, even just typing the question.
So even though an enlightened being has completely eliminated avijja, which in the cessation half of dependent origination leads to the cessation of everything else, including mind and body and so on. Nonetheless, there's still the apparent manifestation of mind and body. But why is there the apparent manifestation of mind and body? And who is it apparently manifesting to? Keep in mind that what we're seeing is not necessarily an awakened being per se, but rather we're seeing our own delusional impression of an awakened being. So we see the world in terms of five khandhas. We see the world in terms of bodies and minds. So we also see awakened beings in terms of khandhas and bodies and minds. Is that what they actually are? Well, actually, elsewhere in the suttas, the Buddha makes it really clear that no, you cannot. There's actually a lovely sutta where the Buddha asks a monk, can you identify the Tathagata in terms of the five khandhas? And the monk says, well, no. And the Buddha says, well, can you identify him separately from the five khandhas? And the monk says, well, no. And the Buddha's like, well, then it seems you can't identify the Tathagata as anything at all. And the monk's like, yeah. So it's this really cute thing where the Buddha is basically pointing out that the way that unenlightened beings relate to reality is so dramatically different from the way an awakened being relates to reality that there's this complete disconnect. We're assuming that they're experiencing reality basically the same way as we are, even though they're not. That's dramatically different. So we see them in the terms that we can relate to them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's their experience. So we see them as being composed of a body and mind. We see them as having six senses. But is that actually the case? Or is that just the projection of our own mind? An easier way of relating to it is to just go through every component of dependent origination and just add on in little brackets the phrase of self-identity or of self-grasping. Then it becomes quite clear. All of that has ceased for an awakened being. But that's kind of cheating. The first answer, I think, is more accurate. The second one is kind of the cheating way of getting around it. Anyway, we'll have a full talk on the subject one of these days. more likely a whole day on the subject.
No, we can do a weekend retreat.
Yeah, could do.
And James says, this is one of about 5 discourses I have never understood in even a mundane way.
I appreciate your honesty.
He says, the whole discourse makes sense until the ending, and then it flips on its head and I get lost, which is concerning because that's an evil view.
Well, we're only halfway through, so tomorrow you have a chance to get flipped on your head, and we'll handle it then.
And Sally says, is last time safety space way to distance myself from outside object and not yearning to grasping? I really like Bhante's explanation on grasping. Take something outside and keep it close to me.
I don't understand. Take as safety space? Can you read the question again, please?
Is last time safety space a way to distance myself from outside object?
Last time safety space? I don't understand. Can you explain in more detail, please?
Yeah, Sally, if you can rephrase the question, that would be great. Jan says, so the khandhas do not exist in an ultimate sense, so it would be correct to say the color red, for example, does not truly exist. It is merely how light is reflected or absorbed by an object, and we define it as red.
So the Buddha said that we cannot relate to things either as existing or as not existing. So from one perspective, the color red is real. From another perspective, it isn't. From one perspective, the khandhas are real. From another perspective, they aren't. Neither perspective is more true than the other. Again, this is laid out quite clearly in the Kachanagota Sutta, but also in a number of other places in the suttas. And it's gone into in a lot more detail in the Mahayana texts. But there are a few places in the Theravada texts which address this subject. But yeah, one way of looking at it is that samsara is inherently formless, and we project form upon it to try to make sense out of it, or just because of our delusional tendencies. Reality inherently is formless, but we project form onto it. Okay.
And Bradley says, to pivot or pivot.
Yeah.
I got it right the first time. To pivot, I find that for myself, health and beauty are tied up in a bundle. What's a useful way to separate the desire to be healthy from the desire to be beautiful?
Well, in my mind, they're completely separate. So just recognize that health is health and just focus on being healthy. But also recognize that being obsessed with health can become mentally unhealthy obsession. So the body is subject to sickness and decay. So we need to accept that as an inevitable fact, inescapable fact. But in the meantime, we try to keep the body relatively healthy because that's supportive to our practice. And beauty tends to be a natural side effect of health. But watch your mind, watch your intentions, watch your attitudes. If you're thinking, I'm going to go work out because I want my body to be healthy so that I can continue practicing well for a long time, that's good. But then if you notice you start thinking, I'm going to go work out because then I'm going to be so hot. Well, that's when you've drifted into the doing it for the sake of beauty side. So look closely at your mind and you'll see that there are these two different intentions. There are these two different attitudes, and you can actually tell which is which. But yeah, there is some connection because when we're healthy, we usually are also more beautiful. It's true. But if the question is why? Why are we taking care of our body? Are we doing it in order to be healthy or in order to be beautiful? Yes?
Sorry, the live chat is full of hilarious comments.
Go ahead.
Like he's like, oh, you caught me there, Bante. And Bradley is like, there's the stretches for full lotus and the sit-ups for the 6-pack.
Yeah, you don't need a 6-pack in order to attain enlightenment.
Bonus points for honesty, though. I quite appreciate that. So Sally is saying safety spaces in a guided meditation in Dukkha retreat. The Huato asked ourselves, Bante left to us at the end as a gift. Where is the safety space? I felt just knowing in that guided meditation made me feel safe from fear, pain, etc. arising.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's a wonderful practice, especially if it's helping you. You can keep it up, keep doing it. So what was the question again? How did that relate? Now that I know what she means by that.
Is last time safety space a way to distance myself from outside object and not turning to grasping? I really like Bante's explanation on grasping. Take something outside and keep it close to me.
Yes, that's a correct understanding. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's all for this morning, unless something else pops up.
Great. So thank you all for joining in and for asking questions and for sharing your experiences. And we'll finish up the sutta tomorrow morning, probably, unless there's a calamitous disaster between now and then, such as the complete shutdown of the internet, for example. Who knows? Or meteors hitting the earth or invasions. Who knows? Lots of things could happen, but we're hoping none of that does and that we're here again in 23 hours to finish up the sutta.
And do not go to illegal gyms, no matter how tempting they are.
In fact, let's be completely realistic here. Just because things are reopening doesn't mean it's safe. Yeah. Be safe.
All right. So let's all be safe and let's all practice the Dhamma. And we'll see you actually this evening for monk chat. So bring all the questions that you have unrelated to the sutta, but also related to the sutta if you like. Raymond says, I barely go to legal gyms, so no worry, Aya. Yeah, actually for me, it would have been like exactly that experience. Like, oh, great, another excuse not to go to the gym.
Yeah.
And Bradley says, I'll bring all the tough questions this evening for monk chat. Great. Also the easy questions for me. All right. Well, see you this evening and see you tomorrow for the second part of this wonderful sutta with Bhante Sudaso. Have a great sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.